Hello and welcome to this training webinar on Materials Requirements Planning MRP process in SAP Business One. My name is Ketan Solanki, and for the next hour or so we will be running through the MRP process in SAP. So MRP has been available in SAP Business One since day one. Since version 8.82, there have been a number of improvements made to this module. A lot of clients are probably not aware of the new features now available in this module. So this session is useful for the people who may have looked at MRP in the early days and did not find it suitable, as well as for those who have not looked at it at all. And of course, it's useful for those who are currently using it, because you may find some additional tips to make the best use of the system. We're going to be using version 9.2 in this presentation, and if there are any features that are applicable to the later versions, I will point those out. So let's have a quick look at the agenda for today. So we're going to do a bit of an overview, then look at some of the setup around administration, warehouse, and item master, then look at creating of forecasts in SAP, running the MRP wizard, and then understanding the results and generating the purchasing or production related documents. And finally, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. Please enter any Q&A related questions in the question panel of the GoToMeeting screen. So let's begin then. So what is MRP, I guess? Or what is MRP in SAP Business One? So MRP in SAP Business One enables you to plan material requirements for manufacturing or purchasing processes. The MRP process calculates the gross requirements for the highest bill of material level based on sales orders, production orders, forecasts, and so on. It also calculates the gross requirements at the lowest BOM levels by carrying down net parent demands through the BOM structure. Dependent levels may have their own requirements based on sales orders and forecasts. The result of the MRP run are recommendations that fulfill gross requirements by taking into consideration the existing inventory level and sources that you define in the MRP run wizard run, such as existing purchase orders, production orders, purchase blanket agreements, stock transfer requests, and so on. For each item, the MRP run also takes into account defined planning rules such as order multiple, order interval, minimum order quantity, lead time, and tolerance days. So just going to quickly put up a visual of the same overview just mentioned. So you've got basically stock on hand, then you have receipts or future receipts based on purchase orders, open production orders, any blanket agreements, any stock transfer requests, and reserve invoices. Likewise, on the requirements side, there will be sales orders, production orders for component items, blanket agreements on the sales side, AR reserve invoices, and any forecasts that you might have selected as part of the MRP run, plus any MINs defined. This also then calculates and feeds the child requirements all the way up to the parent. And finally, you get a final stock recommended or the correct recommended stock level. And that will be based on any minimum stock levels, order multiples, lead times, and so on. So all of that works together to come up with a recommendation for you to either create a purchase order, a production order, or a stock transfer request. So let's now go into the system and have a look at some setup related data. So firstly, under Administration, System Initialization, General Settings, and under Stock and Planning Data, you can define at a global level whether the sales orders that you have in the system consume the forecast or not. What that means is that if you have a forecast defined and you also have sales orders, are they independent of each other and they sum up together to come up with a demand, or does the sales order consume the forecast to the point where it exceeds the forecast you may have defined, and then the sales order then comes into play? So you can choose either or. Now, what happens is that we've defined the forecast consumption at a global level, but at the sales order level, then you can specify whether that particular sales order is consuming the forecast or not. The setting on the sales order will default on from the global setting, but you can then choose for a particular sales order as to whether you wish to consume the forecast or not. Okay, so that's the first setting. Then you also need to set up your warehouse. So under Administration, Setup, Stock Management, and Warehouses. Against each warehouse, you've got to specify whether that warehouse is part of the MRP calculation or not. And that's using this checkbox called Nettable. If this is not ticked, then this warehouse will not be available for selection as part of stock on hand and open documents against that warehouse. Now, of course, even if you've ticked the box and said include this, when you run the MRP visit, you can then exclude specific warehouses as well. So you've got some flexibility even if you include a warehouse. So the third thing you've set up is the item master data itself. So against each item, there's a few bits of information that need to be defined so that the MRP will work appropriately. So firstly, you've got to define who the preferred supplier is. So what then happens is when you run the MRP and the final recommendations come up for if they are to purchase, then this is the supplier that will be used on the recommended purchase order. You can choose to overwrite this supplier on the actual recommendation screen, but this is the one that will come up by default. That's in the purchasing data. Then in the stock data, you can define your minimum, max, and maximum stock levels. And you can do this either at the warehouse level, so each warehouse can have a defined min and max, or you can choose not to manage the stock by warehouse. So if I untick this checkbox, then it's min and max defined at the item level, and there isn't any definition at the warehouse level. So it's entirely up to you, depending on how you plan your inventory, whether you do everything at a global level or you are doing replenishment at the warehouse level. So the final tab we're looking at is the planning data tab. And this is where, firstly, you define whether this item is going to be considered as part of an MRP run or not. So the planning method is either MRP or none. If it's none, then this item will not appear in the recommendations. The next setting is the procurement method. So this you're defining whether you're going to raise a purchase order for the item or you're going to raise a production order for the item, if you set it to make. Order interval. So this is how often you generally plan to purchase this item. So you've got different purchasing cycles for different items. Some items may be weekly, some items may be monthly, and so on. So these are defined in the order interval setup. So I've got two different order intervals defined here. First one is monthly on the first day of the month, and the second one is weekly. Should probably be on a Monday. And so the importance of this is if you do not set up your order intervals, then there's a potential for the system to recommend purchase orders for every single day of the week if there is a demand for every single day. You know, you might have sales orders that are due on different days of the week, and if you do not have any order interval defined, then you'll end up with multiple purchase orders for the same item within the same week. The next setting is the minimum order quantity and the order multiple. So this is generally the minimum order quantity and order multiple are what's been defined by a supplier. They might have said, you know, you have to at least order 120 units when you place an order, and after which they need to be in increments of 30. So if MRP visit runs and works out that you need, for example, 90 units, well, based on the minimum order quantity, it will recommend that you place an order for 120. Or if the calculation turned out to be, let's say, 125, then it's going to go the next multiple up and recommend 150 units. The lead time is basically the number of days it takes the item to either be delivered to you from the day you place the purchase with your supplier, or to be manufactured if it's a manufactured item. The tolerance days basically allow you to specify an additional tolerance that you are willing to accept for the delivery of the product or for the manufacturing of the product. So those are the settings that need to be defined within the item and various other places within the system for you to be able to run MRP and make sense of it. So now let's look at how to define forecasts in the system. So you go under MRP and forecasts, and what you'll see is if you start adding a new forecast, firstly you've got to define a forecast code and a forecast name, and then you specify a date range for which this forecast is applicable. So if and then you also define how you're going to enter the forecast, so whether it's going to be entered as daily, weekly, or monthly. So if I say daily, then I'm basically entering a forecast for every single day within that period. If I say weekly, then I'm entering forecasts for every week, and monthly would be monthly. So once you've made that initial decision of what view you're going to take the forecasts in, you can then start entering the forecast manually if you choose. So you can just pick a bunch of items and start entering the forecast week by week. Of course, that's not going to be the most efficient way of doing this. You'll also notice that you can also now define, I think this is since 9.1 version, you can also now define the forecast per warehouse. So you could have a different forecast for each warehouse, particularly where you're doing procurement in a decentralized manner. So you can, as I said, you can enter your forecast. The second way you can get your forecast in is via data transfer workbench. So if you're familiar with that, this is the mass import tool available from SAP. You can set up your files in Excel and then use the data transfer workbench to import your forecast. But that probably has been superseded a little now by the ability in SAP to do Excel-based copy and paste. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So if I pull open a forecast, I can copy the contents of that forecast by just right-clicking Copy Table. And if I go into Excel, I can paste the data in. I can manipulate this data in Excel. So I can change some of the quantities and so on. And then I can grab the data, say copy, and if I paste it back in here, I'll be asked the question, do the selected contents include header information? And if I say yes, it's going to basically map the data that I've got in my Excel clipboard to the columns on the screen. And basically now I've updated this information. Now, I don't necessarily have to export the data out. I can just be in Excel, have the data ready, copy it, and then just paste it straight in here, and that would work just as well. So this is a very powerful tool. This has been introduced since version 9.1. So that's a third way, and the fourth way of doing this is you can basically generate the forecast based on historical sales. So you'll notice there's a button here at the bottom right corner of the forecast screen. If I click on that, I can then select items by preferred supplier. So I can just say, you know, I want to set up a forecast for the sales of items that I'm purchasing from supplier X, or you can just do, you know, an item range, or use properties within the items, or do it based on the default warehouse of the product. I'm just going to go back to the setting by item number and just pick a range of items. Okay, and then I can generate the forecast by warehouse, but I'm not doing that at this stage. All I want to do is create a forecast at a global level across the company. Now, when I go into the advanced settings, I can then say I wish to generate this based on sales history, and I've got two options here. I can either do it based on a simple average, where it'll just take the period and sales for that period and divide it by the number of periods, and it's just a simple average. Or I can use a monthly history, where the corresponding months become the forecast for that month. So let me start off by just doing a simple average, and then you have a choice here on whether the history should be based on sales orders or it should be based on deliveries and invoices. Now, the reason you choose sales orders is if you are having a lot of lost sales where the sales order has been entered, but you know, the order has been cancelled because you couldn't fulfill, then it would make sense to use sales orders as your feed into history. Otherwise, you go with deliveries and invoices. So you've got to select a period for which the history is going to be generated, and the date range is going to be based on the period, the start and the end date of the forecast. So I only can enter a from date, and because here we're looking at 7 months, I'm just going to start with 1st of October 2015, and it works out that 7 months gets us to the end of May. So I've done my selection, and if I click OK, I get a simple average, which means that every month forecast is the same. It's just picked up my total sales for the period and divided it by the number of months. So that's the simple average approach. If I just clear this out and do this again, and this time I'm going to do the same selections, but instead of doing a simple average, I'm going to do a monthly history. And click OK. And this time it's basically done, just the corresponding sales for that month. And so there's different figures month by month. Now what I can also do here is I can select particular lines and say, I know that we're expecting growth in these two items, and I feel that there's going to be a 10% increase in sales. I can go into this box here on the top right corner, and if I type in 10 and tab out of the column, then it'll automatically increase the forecast for each month that it's highlighted by the 10%. So that's a bit of detailed information about how to generate forecasts and how to manipulate it. Let's now go and run the MRP wizard. Okay, so I've got three different scenarios defined here. I've got firstly a scenario where we're just purchasing items into stores. A second scenario where we're purchasing items into store, but it's in relation to production as well. And the third one where we're also considering purchasing at the warehouse level and looking at stock transfers at the same time. So we're starting off with just regular purchasing. So I could go and create a new scenario and then go through all that, but I'm going to run through all the fields just picking up the existing scenario. So there's a description, there's a start date and an end date for that scenario. I can choose to see the resulting data in blocks of X number of days, weeks, or months. So I have selected weeks, and based on that selection, the system's saying my planning horizon is 32 weeks. So from now till 1st of January 2017. So let's now look at this option here, which says considering holidays. So we can choose to consider holidays for make items as well as for buy items, and it probably makes sense for items that you're manufacturing that your lead time is based on working days as opposed to calendar days. But generally when it comes to purchasing data, your lead times are, particularly if you're purchasing from overseas, your lead times would be based on calendar days. So you've got to check this box to say whether the lead times that you've defined for purchasing or production items, are they based on calendar days or working days. So I'm going to leave production items ticked as working days and purchase items to be calendar days. Ignore cumulative lead time. This is applicable only for items that are manufactured. So I will not touch on this in this example because we're only looking at purchased items at this stage. So we'll come back to this one when we look at production order items. Then we want to sort by item code, which is cool. Display items with no requirements. So if we run the MRP and if I didn't tick this box, then any items that don't have a requirement will not show up. It would be useful to have this ticked so that in the event that you expected something to have a recommendation and it doesn't, then you can drill into it and see why that would be the case. Display selected items. Again, this is applicable to manufactured products only, so we'll come back to that. The final setting here is simulation. So if you tick this box, then you run through the MRP process the same way, but you cannot generate any purchase orders at the end of the process. So you're just sort of simulating, but not taking any action at the end. Okay, so we've done the setup. Let's go next. So on this screen, you pick the items that you wish to include in the MRP run. So you can either say just select all items, and in which case everything will be considered, everything that's marked as MRP on the item master will be included. Otherwise, you can go in and add items, and then you've got various selection criteria, same as any sort of standard item selection screens, item groups, properties, range. Plus, you have the opportunity to do an expanded selection criteria, and in that case, you can use UDFs, as well as things like the preferred supplier. So I'm going to stay with my range of products that we've seen previously in the forecast, and I add that on. So this screen here has probably got some enhancements. We can now see the procurement method on that item in the master data, the order interval, the order multiples, minimum order quantities, lead time. All that information is now visible. But not only that, I can also go in and change the value for those parameters just for this particular run. So it is particularly useful if you were doing an MRP run for one supplier, and if they had possibly different lead times or different order intervals for different items, and for a particular run you just want to make them all the same, you can manipulate it for this run and this run only. And bear in mind that you can also grab this data, copy table, put it into Excel, make any changes, and then paste the information back. So let's now move on. We've selected the items that we wish to include, and we can deselect certain items as well if we need to. We go next. And this is where any warehouse that has been defined as nettable will appear. And on this screen, I can still deselect and choose whether the existing stock in that warehouse is considered, any demand in that warehouse is considered, and any supply in that warehouse is considered. I'm choosing to run at a company level. So I'm just looking at the overall company requirement. If I wanted to replenish by warehouse, then I would choose the run by warehouse option. So choosing company, go next. So here we've got a few other selections we've got to do, types of transactions that are considered or feed into the calculations. So firstly, the time range. Whether we only want to consider the date range we selected in the first screen, so which was from today till 1st of July, or 1st of January, or we also want to include historical data. So what is historical data? So historical data is any open purchase orders, any open sales orders that have a due date prior to today, that are, if they're still open. And it probably makes sense to include those unless you've got, things that are open from way back and they don't mean anything. You should always include historical data. Then you have the sources of demand and supply to be included. You can choose to include purchase requests and purchase quotations if you want to. It probably don't make a lot of sense, but you can. And the main ones are purchase orders, blanket purchase agreements. Likewise, on the sales side, it's sales orders, blanket sales, open production orders. Stock transfer requests probably don't mean too much when you're doing it at a company level. But reserve invoices, and then you can also define whether you wish to consider minimum stock levels or not. And there's a few choices here as well. So you can choose required, minimum, maximum. And this one here, which is called minimum to maximum, which is a new one, which basically allows the system to recommend a quantity if you go below minimum, and the recommendation will take you up to the maximum stock level. You can choose the forecast that you're going to use as one of the feed in for demand, and then from a recommendations perspective, you decide whether you want to have purchase requests or purchase orders being created. You can also disregard or filter out specific transactions from the calculations. So if you have a purchase order that is related to a particular project, for example, and it really shouldn't be used as part of the calculation, then you can go in and select that particular purchase order and say, ignore this purchase order in my calculations. So once we've got all these settings selected, we can run. And the resulting output, as we said, we want to see data in blocks or buckets of weeks. So we've got the weeks of the year within the date range we've selected across the page. And we've basically got recommended quantities by period for each one of those items. Anything that appears in red is indicating that there's a problem. It means that we may not be able to fulfill the demand in time. So if I just ticked this box that says filter possible problem items, basically we'll get rid of anything that's not red. A few other things worth knowing. So the items you appear in the grid, and there's various different shades of gray within the grid. So, and this represent different information. So firstly, anything that's sort of white or very light is indicating that that's sort of the lead time of that item. So first item, basically the lead time is really short. It doesn't even go into the next week. So it's week number 23 on is all clear. The second item also has a short lead time, and so in that case, it's also just gray. The third item has got dark gray, and if I scroll across, the dark gray is going all the way to week 34, which is where the lead time of that item is sitting. Right, so week 34, so that's basically week 34 back to week 22, it's about 12 weeks or so. And you can see that item has a lead time of 90 days. Now let's expand into one of these items just to see where the calculations are coming from. So if I click on the triangle here, then I expand in and I can see a bit more information. I can see that my current stock on hand is 1127, and let's just check on that. So 1127 is the total stock across all locations. I can also see that my minimum stock level is 50. And looking at the planning data, My lead time is 10 days, minimum order quantity 120, order interval weekly. So coming back here, I can then see that there is a supply of 25 units that's expected to arrive, and this is all historical data. And if I click on that number, then I get to see all the documents that make up that count of 25. So I can see there's a whole heap of purchase orders that are open. Some of them are very old, that saying that there's going to be 25 units arriving at some stage. Then I've got 279 of demand. So that's sales orders or production orders that are still open, that are historical, so due prior to today. So based on that, I have the final stock. If those transactions occur within that period, then my final stock holding is 873. Then I've got another demand here for a sales order of 1 unit, keep bringing me down to 872. It's telling me I need to order 1650 today, right now, because we're red and we're late. And if that purchase order is raised, then based on the lead time of 10 days, we will see the items arrive on the 4th of June, which is week 23. And I've got the forecasted demand of 2499. So basically, my current stock on hand plus my forecast, or rather my stock on hand minus my forecast will land me with a negative stock of 1650, which is why there's a recommendation for 1650 to be ordered immediately, so that it's we're going to be late, but it'll still cover our requirements for that period. So the initial stock value will show you the expected stock on hand at the beginning of that period, and then the final stock will show you the stock on hand at the end of that given period. If we go further out to week 26, we see there's a purchase order to be placed in that week, and that's, again, if you look at the demand, it's based on a forecast that we had entered. Right? We can also go back into the forecast from there and see where the figures are coming from. And you'll notice that those are the figures that are coming through. Okay, and so within this grid as well, you can see the dark gray, which is within the lead time, or the light gray, which is outside of lead time, and color coding. So that's the recommendations week by week. If we then go into the recommendations tab, we get to see all the items and all the recommendations. We can sort this by due date. We can sort it for exceptions. So, these are all the ones that have a problem that we need to act on immediately. But this isn't the screen where you can raise the purchase order or the production order. This is just the recommendation screens. If we're happy with the recommendations, we can save them. Right? If I've previously run this MRP wizard, and which is why it's asking me whether I wish to overwrite the previous recommendations. If I say yes, now I've saved the recommendations, and if I right-click here, I can then go into the order recommendations. I can also go into the order recommendations from MRP and order recommendations, and then select a scenario. and then do a date filter so that we may be only looking at data within a certain period. Right, so then we're only looking at just recommendations for that particular date range. Or you could right-click on the MRP result and go order recommendations. And then you get to see all the recommendations that have been made. You can also use SAP functionality to filter the results of this screen. You can look at the due dates. You can even manipulate the due dates, so you can change the due dates if appropriate. You can sort this data by supplier so that everything for a particular supplier is showing up together. You can change the quantities that you wish to order. So if there were two orders very close to one another, then you might say, well, actually, what, I'll consolidate them into one line. I don't want the supplier to be sending me two different shipments when it's so close to each other. So once you've looked at it, reviewed it, updated any of the information, you can then go in and raise the appropriate documents. So, if you want to action, I just want to action and create purchase orders for these two lines. I wish to ignore the other documents at this stage. And what will happen is, because the two lines that I've selected are for two different suppliers, the system will generate two purchase orders for me. Okay, so all items purchased from the same supplier will get consolidated into one purchase order. So if I click Update, it's telling me two new purchase orders were created, and those two lines will disappear from the order recommendation screen now. If I go into my purchase order and look at the last two, there's the first one. It puts in the delivery date based on the MRP recommendations, and there's the second one. So system automatically generates the purchase order for you. Okay. So let's now exit this screen, and what I'm going to do is run the MRP visit one more time, and this time we're going to look at focus on items where there's production involved or bills of materials involved. So I'm selecting a different scenario this time, and let's now look a bit closely at the options that are related to production. So firstly, ignore cumulative lead time. So if we check this box, then the lead time for an item which has a bill of material is purely the lead time defined on its item master. However, if I do not tick this item, then what it will do is it will go all the way down the bill of materials to the lowest level and work out the longest lead time at each one of those levels, sum that up, and that becomes the cumulative lead time for the top level item. Okay, so depending on how you've defined the lead time on your item master, whether the lead time is purely production time or it also includes procurement time, you need to decide which to tick. Sort by. So if we sort by assembly sequence, then what will happen is the result of the run will show us items sorted by the from the parent item all the way down to the lowest level components. They will be sorted in that manner. And then display selected items only. So if we check this box, and if in our selection there are items which have bills of materials, then only those items will appear. However, if I don't tick this box, then any components that go into those bill of materials all the way to the bottom level BOM will be included. So I'm not going to tick this box at this stage. So let's go next. And I've already selected a couple items here. So I've only selected 2 items. Both of these items are bill of material or BOM items and production items. So LM4029 and LM4030. Let's drill into each one, or drill into one of them anyway. So I can see that this item is a bill of material, but not only that, it also has a child bill of material. So it's a 2-level bill of material. So I've selected 2 BOM items. We go next. I'm still going to run this at the company level. I've got a different forecast, so I've got a forecast defined for those 2 items. And if I execute this, so even though I only selected 2 items, it shows a bunch of other items that are part of the BOM. Plus, I can see that it's sorted it so that my parent item appear on top, and then the next level bill of material, and then the lowest level. So again, let's have a look at the lead time on this item. So you can see that from the second item, if I expand it out, it is gray all the way to week 40, which is the cumulative lead time on this item. So if I look at the item itself, has, okay, the item itself doesn't have a lead time, but because all the components that go into it have such a long lead time, the cumulative lead time is just huge. Or if I look at the second one, or the first item, which has a lead time of 10 days, and even though the lead time is 10 days, it's showing a cumulative lead time of 20 odd weeks. Now, if I went back and re-ran this, and said ignore cumulative lead time, all of a sudden my lead time is just shortened out. Okay, so that's a choice you've got to make when you're running this. I'm going to go back and untick this. And run. Okay, so let's now expand out and have a bit of a closer look at what's going on. So I can see there's a forecasted demand. I've got 282 on hand, so I've got plenty to cover that. Then I've got another demand of 110. I'm okay to cover that. Then I've got a demand for 120, and now I'm getting into the red zone. I don't have enough to cover it. And my cumulative lead time is such that I really only will be able to make this item in week 40. Right? It's telling me I'm late, but that's the earliest I can make it if we sum up all the lead times and look at all the stock. So most of this is being fed because this sub-assembly that goes into the item has got some problems. The 2 child components that go into it have insufficient stock, and they both have really long lead times. So you got 120-day lead time on this child component, and we just won't be able to get that in time. So it just has a follow-on effect on any items further above it in the bill of material chain. Okay, so that's how the calculations work when you have bill of material and child components. So looking at the recommendations, again, you end up with either purchase orders or production orders being recommended depending on whether the item is a make item or a buy item. And if we save the recommendations, we can then go back into the order recommendations screen, and then if we tick the boxes, those production orders will be created with those due dates. Okay, so finally, I'm just going to quickly run through the example where we're running for stock transfers. And so in this case, we are running by warehouse instead of at a company level. And we're then also saying we wish to create stock transfer requests if appropriate. I've got a recommendation here, or rather a forecast here, and I can see in the forecast item, the first item there, I've got forecast for warehouse 01 as well as warehouse 02. And if I run the process, it will consider both those forecasts as part of the calculation, and when the recommendations are done, the purchasing will be into the warehouse where the demand is, and if there isn't sufficient stock in a particular warehouse and another warehouse can cover it, there will also be a recommendation for a stock transfer request. And so if I go into the recommendations, I can then raise a stock transfer request as well.